Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most powerful, misunderstood, and honestly, fascinating forces in modern history, nationalism. It's a buzzword, right? We hear it in the news literally every single day. But here's the thing. It possesses this deeply schizophrenic, almost Jekyll and Hyde kind of character. Throughout history, it's been this incredible force that liberated oppressed peoples and built modern democracies. But, on the flip side, it's also been used to justify conquest, imperialism, and some truly devastating wars. So we're going to map out exactly how that duality actually works. Okay, so let's just dive right into this by asking the most fundamental question, really just to clear up the everyday confusion surrounding the topic. Before we can even begin to understand nationalism, we have to define what a nation actually is. People are always throwing around words like nation, state, and country as if they're completely interchangeable. Heck, even the United Nations is technically a misnomer. It's actually an assembly of states. Politically speaking, these words just don't mean the same thing at all. Now let's clear up a massive misconception right off the bat. Patriotism and nationalism are absolutely not the same thing. Patriotism is simply an emotion. It's a psychological attachment, a genuine love for your country. You can be deeply patriotic without making any political demands whatsoever. But nationalism? That's a whole different ballgame. It's a hardline political doctrine. It is the active, driving belief that the nation itself should be the absolute central principle of how a society is politically organized. Section 1. What is a nation? Defining the concept. So, what actually binds these so-called imagined communities together? Well, it's a really fascinating blend. On one hand, you've got objective factors. Nations often share a common language, a dominant religion, or a distinct ethnic background. But those objective factors alone simply aren't enough. Ultimately, nations are subjective, psychopolitical entities. A nation exists because a group of people truly believe they belong together, they share a patriotic loyalty, and, crucially, they demand national rights. Without that subjective loyalty, you just have a demographic group, not an actual nation. Section 2. The birth of nationalism, a historical timeline. Now, this concept of a nation demanding political rights, that wasn't always around. For centuries, people were basically just subjects to a king. But tracing the timeline, we see nationalism's revolutionary birth way back in 1789 during the French Revolution. This was the seismic shift where everyday subjects of the crown suddenly transformed into citizens of France. The nation basically became its own master. And this revolutionary spark spread like wildfire. It ignited the mid-19th century unifications of Italy and Germany, then shaped the globe in 1919 when Woodrow Wilson championed post-World War I national self-determination. And finally, it culminated in a massive wave of post-1945 decolonization across Africa and Asia, as colonized peoples adopted these exact same nationalist ideas to win their independence. You really can't talk about this revolutionary birth without mentioning the philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Now, while he didn't actually invent the word nationalism, his doctrine of popular sovereignty and the general will totally paved the way for it. He argued that ultimate power shouldn't rest with some monarch wearing a crown, but with the indivisible collective will of the people themselves. It was a radical, absolute game-changer of a shift that provided the philosophical bedrock for the nation to govern itself. Section 3. Civic versus ethnic nations. Rival concepts. As nationalism spread globally over the centuries, it didn't stay uniform. It ended up splitting into two totally contrasting interpretations over a very sensitive, very crucial question: who actually belongs? First up, we have civic nationalism. This view is highly inclusive. It argues that the nation is based entirely on political allegiance and civic consciousness. So regardless of your race or religion, if you commit to the nation's values, boom, you are a citizen. Conversely, ethnic nationalism is exclusive. It argues that nations are bound by common descent, bloodline, and primordial ties. In this view, you can't just join the nation, you actually have to be born into it. And you can actually map these views right across the political spectrum. It moves from liberal multicultural inclusion over on the far left, focusing heavily on that civic loyalty we just talked about, all the way over to fascist exclusion on the far right, which defines the nation organically, often by race, viewing nations as locked in this perpetual struggle for survival. Section 4. The liberating face. Progressive nationalism. This brings us to the first of nationalism's two major faces, the liberating, democratic side. Figures like the Italian thinker Giuseppe Mazzini perfectly championed this liberal nationalism. He fought hard against autocratic multinational empires.
Mazzini believed in fusing a cultural community with the radical right to self-government. In fact, he famously founded Young Italy to promote unification, and even Young Europe to spread these liberating ideas all across the continent.
This liberating face of liberal nationalism, it essentially operates on a foundation of universal rights. It believes that all nations, just like all individuals, are fundamentally equal and completely entitled to self-determination. The ultimate goal here isn't just to make one single nation strong, but to create a peaceful, cooperative international order made up of independent, constitutionally governed nation-states. It's rational, it's principled, and it deeply respects human rights. It's really the idealized version of the global community we so often strive for today.
Section 5. The oppressive face, reactionary nationalism. But to really understand the full picture, we've got to flip the coin and objectively look at nationalism's darker, reactionary side, where the whole ideology shifts away from liberation and toward exclusion and dominance. First, we see this shift manifest as conservative nationalism. Instead of looking forward to universal rights, this form looks backward. It relies heavily on nostalgia, tradition, and a shared culture to maintain strict social cohesion. Conservative nationalism is usually mobilized when national identity feels threatened, sometimes viewing things like immigration or supranational bodies, think the EU, for example, as direct threats to the traditional cultural bonds of the society. Now, when this reactionary side goes a step further, the oppressive face really rears its head as jingoism. This is an intense, almost hysterical mood of popular nationalism. It wasn't about self-determination anymore. Suddenly, it was all about conquest and domination. Jingoism was the exact fuel behind the aggressive late 19th century scramble for Africa, where imperial expansion was wildly celebrated in the streets of Europe as the ultimate measure of national glory. At the very root of this expansionist drive is something called chauvinism. And here's a fun fact. It's actually named after Nicolas Chauvin, who was this mythical French soldier fanatically devoted to Napoleon. Chauvinism completely abandons the liberal idea that all nations are equal. Instead, it operates on the uncritical, unreasoned belief that one's own nation is inherently, morally, or even biologically superior to all the others. Operating on that chauvinistic belief, we end up with the traits of full-blown expansionist nationalism. It is strictly defined by militarism, a very rigid hierarchy of nations, and absolutely ruthless power politics. Instead of seeking a peaceful international order, it actively seeks to dominate. Historically, this aggressive form is what culminated in the devastating fascist empires of the interwar period in Germany, Italy, and Japan. So here is nationalism's truly remarkable duality. It's the exact same core concept, the importance of the nation, but taken in wildly, wildly different directions. It can act as this rational, progressive force fighting for human rights and collective security, or it can completely morph into a highly emotional, reactionary force driving imperialism and the belief in a strict hierarchy of nations. Which brings us to the end, and we want to leave you with this final provocative thought. As we navigate an increasingly interconnected age, look at the news around you today. Which face of nationalism are you actually seeing? Is it acting as a vital force for democratic unity and self-determination? Or is it bubbling up as a reactionary source of exclusion and division? These two contrasting faces continue to shape the very map of the world we live in today. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning what you see.